Hello, I'm Katrina German. I'm the CEO and founder of ethicaldigital.ca, and today we're talking about understanding the impacts of social media on student mental health. This presentation has been brought to you by Saskatchewan Industry Education Council and Ethical Digital, and we're changing the trajectory of the internet. So, what are we talking about today? We can go through several different steps. The first is how social media works and research that shows the effects on student well being. Second is how much time people should be spending on social media and how to recognize a social media addiction. Then we're going to head into cyberbullying, what to do about it, and then how to communicate with parents about social media use. Then, finally, we're going to have some strategies and tactics for sharing this information with your students. So let's get started. So, why does this topic matter? First of all, 92% of students are active on social media. Some estimates go up to 99%. This is a totally different experience than what a lot of us had growing up. We're the first generation on and pioneers of the internet. And so we need to understand how some of these effects are influencing the way that our students are growing up and understanding and perceiving the world. So, the very first thing that we want to talk about is how social media works. So most people think social media is like their personal newsletter where they can go through and take a look at what their friends and family are doing, and it certainly does this. But the way that social media is making their millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases, is because they are highly effective marketing platforms. And this is something that we really need to be understanding and really be conscious of as we move forward. Because these platforms are there to get people's attention. So they're going to do all sorts of things to keep your attention, keep you coming back to the platform to be consuming the ads that people are paying for. And so, what they're going to be doing is showing you different things that you want to see to make you happy, to bring you back. But they're also going to be influencing the types of things that you're learning and the way that you're communicating with others. So, it's really important to understand that social media isn't just a point of connection and ways that we're communicating with each other. It is actually a highly sophisticated marketing platform. And so, that has a different effect on the way that we're approaching social media and what to be thinking about and how we're engaging with it, especially how we're communicating this with our students. So, the thing to understand about social media is that there's a lot of really amazing things that are coming out of it as well. There's connections that are happening of people around the world. There's entire movements that are starting up in society. There's a lot of really amazing things that are coming out of the social media space and having people be able to connect and grow in different ways than they've ever have in the past. However, there's some downfalls that we need to be recognizing. There's a lot of studies that have been going on for the last several years, and these are really starting to amplify. And at the beginning, a lot of these studies were talking about a correlation. They could see that there were connections between social media and some of the issues with mental health. But they could also see, now we're starting to see that there are some issues of causation, where we're starting to see that people are actually engaging with life in a different way, and it's causing them some mental health issues in different forms. Also, when we're talking about mental health issues, we're also really talking about that quite broadly. We're talking about it in terms of well-being, essentially. So, are you having the best life that you can be having, and are your students having that best life that they can be having? Or is it something that is, actually affecting and making them having a worse experience with life into actually causing something clinical or something that's having an issue? And so what we're seeing, this isn't unusual, between 10 and 20% of children are having mental health issues and actually clinically diagnosed with mental health issues. But this isn't special. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, about 50% of people will have had a mental illness by the age of 40. So this is very common. And a lot of people are saying mental health issues are becoming a lot more prevalent after the pandemic. And so this is something that we really want to be talking about, the correlation and causation between these two things in terms of our students' experience and also our own personal experience with social media and mental health. So, one of the areas that is really important for us to look at is the area of depression. There are a lot of studies that are showing high correlations between heavy social media use and higher depression incidents and issues. And so it's important for us to be thinking about the area of depression and even just feeling low and feeling less accepted and connected with our community. So there are a lot of studies that have come out that do show that there is a connection between people who are dealing with depression and just the way that they're experiencing and being online. And often this is also related to anxiety. And one of the things that we really see is the idea around FOMO and the fear of missing out. This is actually a relatively new term that's been created since the internet was there. And this is also something that really affects our teenagers, probably even more acutely than a lot of adults. And basically, the idea of FOMO is the idea that you're missing out. Everybody you know is doing something special or, and you're just feeling like you're not a part of it. And this is something that we can actually see regularly happening through social media with our teenagers and just in general online. And so, in a recent study, 70% of teens said they felt left out or excluded because of social media. And this is a big deal, especially because we know developmentally a lot of our teens are really feeling this acutely. And so we want to be addressing this and thinking about how FOMO is affecting them in their day to day lives. There's a really interesting study that's come out that is connecting FOMO and depression. And essentially, researchers talked to students and had several of them go for a week without being online and without comparing themselves to others and having FOMO. And almost every one of those students, especially those who were suffering from depression, actually saw an increase in their mental health and their experience with the world. And they were feeling more connected and better once they had taken a week off. So there is actual evidence that's showing that having some time away and not having that constant comparison and connection with the community online can actually have benefits, especially for those who are already feeling depression. And something that's happening with our young people that's really actually kind of acute for FOMO is the idea around snap maps. So it's not just that people are seeing photos of their friends as they're all out, but a lot of teenagers are actually monitoring themselves and their friend groups through snap maps and seeing where their friends are at different points. This is, showing the world essentially. There's some security issues around this too, but exactly where a lot of teenagers are at all times. And so a lot of teenagers are actually looking. So even if they're not even seeing on social media, their friends have gathered at a party and they're not there, they're actually able to see, oh, all their friends are at the mall, or everybody's playing hockey, or everybody's doing something that they're not a part of. And so even though if it's not overtly out there that somebody is not being, included in an activity, it also can have an effect just, subtly through day to day where a lot of our students are looking and feeling like, am I included? Am I not included? So being aware of just even the effects of this day-to-day understanding of am I a part of things or not a part of things can really have a strong effect on our students and how they're experiencing the world. Depression can also be showing up in a really interesting area called vague booking. And this is sort of a funny thing. It's sort of a phrase where somebody puts something out like, just some days you just can't win, kind of things where they're kind of calling out for help. They're not putting out anything specific, but they're sort of saying, I'm not okay, and I'm putting it out there. So one of the things that we're actually mentioning, and would be great for you to share with your students, is the idea that if you see somebody who's actually vague booking, they are actually asking for attention and for connection. And that's what we're all looking for online. So there's an opportunity there for us to support each other. If somebody puts out a vague book, like, it's been a bad day, but, tomorrow's always brighter, things like that, commenting on that and really making a connection with that person can be really helpful in helping them with their mental health and feeling more connected. They're actually calling out for help with that type of vague booking activity. And, you can actually do something to help people with their mental health when they're asking for it online in that way. Another thing that we're seeing is around the idea of social media and comparison. And this is something that, we all do. We all compare ourselves to everybody, but particularly for our teenagers and young people, that comparison piece has just so much more acuteness. And so, if we're looking at some of the studies that are around social media and comparison, we can actually see that if people take a break from social media, they actually, again, feel a little bit better about themselves. So, what they're talking about in this particular piece is that you're looking at other people, you're seeing their lives. Of course, everybody's just putting their highlight reel up, but studies are showing that if that's actually affecting you negatively, where you walk away from your social media scrolling and you're thinking, I'm not enough. I'm never going to be that way. Things like that. There might be an opportunity to unfollow people who don't make you feel positive and make you feel like you can achieve things, and really think about how you're curating your own personal social media experience to make sure that you're getting the information and the connections with people that are making you feel better rather than worse. So just being conscious that social media amplifies comparison, and there are things that you can do about that. If you're not feeling good, don't go online and look at people who are doing better than you. And if you're feeling like you need motivation, go for it. But in the meantime, being aware that understanding that comparison does get amplified when we're looking on social media, and that can have an effect on us as well as our students. A huge issue that's influencing our students as well is around the idea of sleep. In fact, I could do an entire session just on terms of how social media is affecting sleep. And it's not just the studies that we've been hearing about blue light and how we shouldn't be interacting with social media because it actually keeps us up and messes with our circadian rhythms. Basically, it shows us light at night and keeps us awake. It's also things like you not wanting to miss out. There's a lot of students and a lot of studies that have shown that students are actually going to sleep a lot later than they have in the past because they don't want to be missing out with what's going on with their friendship conversations. Secondly, it's also a lot about the vibrations and different notifications that come up from your phone while you're sleeping that are actually physically disrupting your sleep cycle. And so, being aware that a lot of our students are dealing with later nights than they would have in the past because they are not wanting to miss out on their social groups and that sort of thing, that can have a huge impact on our classrooms and just the way that we're overall experiencing our day to day lives. And so, being conscious that sleep is really being affected right now by our social media patterns is something that's really important for our classrooms and for ourselves. So, what's recommended is that you don't use social media platforms. Some experts say 2 hours before bed, others say half an hour. But the idea is not only are we trying to avoid the physical disruptions that sleep can, or that our phones can offer with notifications and that sort of thing, we're also not going to get down those rabbit holes and be like, oh, I'm just going to check on a quick little something about my friend. And the next thing you know, it's 3 hours later and you've been doom scrolling all night. So, really be conscious about your own experience, but also being aware that students need extra sleep. And, developmentally, teenagers need a lot of sleep. But in the meantime, it is one of those things that is really being affected by social media and phone use right now. And productivity. My goodness, there's a lot of studies out there about how social media and our phones are affecting productivity. And the most interesting piece of this is if you're interrupted, oftentimes it can take you up to about 25 minutes to come back onto track and to get focused. And so if you're thinking about your notifications on your phone and your students and their phones going off, they're focused, they're working on something, and all of a sudden their brain gets pulled into a different direction because a notification has taken them into social media, you can see how disruptive this can be in classrooms and day-to-day use and then just general productivity in general. Also, if you think about it, experts say that you should be, using between less than 2 hours, but only about half an hour of social media a day. We'll talk about that a lot more later. But in the meantime, if you think about what you're doing with your phone, which is, just sort of engaging, just passive activity oftentimes, think about what you could be doing instead with that time in particular. And instead, a lot of that time is just being wasted, through the social media activities. And in fact, a lot of our students are having less contact with each other. They're having less, social interaction. Even the idea of eye contact has been studied because a lot of people are not learning how to communicate with each other as much because a lot of our communication is now happening through devices. And so there are a lot of changes that are happening with our young people, even in the way that they communicate. And so we want to be thinking a lot about how our phones and how social media specifically are affecting our classrooms, but also how they're affecting us personally as teachers and educators, but also how they're affecting just the overall engagement in those ways and also the future of our children and how they're going to be engaging with the world. There are also a lot of studies that are showing that there are differences in the way that girls and boys are also being affected by social media. And girls actually tend to be affected a lot more by a lot of the social impacts of it, in that they are often more socially inclined. And a lot of the studies are showing that when you are mixing in this next level of engagement, that it's actually can have even more detrimental effects on our young women in the long term, especially around their self-esteem, with the comparison piece, depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. A lot of our young men are also affected by their communication. A lot of them are engaging through online gaming. And these are broad generalizations, but there are a lot of effects that are happening. And one thing that they have seen through studies actually is that a lot of the impacts of online gaming on behavior and acting out tend to sort of happen more in an immediate short term. Those effects happen in the short term. Whereas a lot of the social media impacts have more of a long term effect on our young women. So we want to be thinking about this as well in terms of gender, how each of these different groups are being affected by this different different thing. And there are a lot of different studies about the different social norms between different friend groups that do talk about the differences in different genders and how they are influenced by social media. So it is something that we want to be thinking about, is that, how are we working on this? We're not really addressing yet or anything around the transgender and gender fluidity, but it is something that there's a lot of studies underway around how gender is affected differently by different social media, and there's absolutely an effect. So, how much time should people be spending online? The World Health Organization says they've broken it out for young people. So, under the 1 year of age, they said they should not be spending any time online, no time in connection. For 1 to 2 years of age, no screen time for 1 year old and no more than an hour for 2 year olds. And even with less time is preferred. 3 to 4 year olds, they're saying no more than 1 hour per day. And then all other ages, they're saying that it should be less than 2 hours a day is recommended, but some experts are actually recommending less than half an hour a day. So a few of you have just gasped as you've looked at your phone and realized, wow, I probably spend 3, 4 hours a day. And the average Canadian spends over 2.5 hours a day on social media. And so we all need to be thinking about that most of us are consuming a lot more social media than we should be, according to the World Health Organization. So there's sometimes jokes being made about, oh, I have a social media addiction. I can't get away from my phone. But ultimately, actually, about 10 to 20% of the population do have a clinical addiction. So, how can you tell if it's an actual social media addiction versus just heavy use? Essentially, if it is starting to cause problems in your relationships, in your life, if it's not getting in the way of other activities that you used to do, if you're choosing it over things that bring you joy or some sort of self fulfillment, these are all signs that you've actually moved into a space of having a social media addiction. And it's interesting too, because as adults, 46% of adults reported that they can't live without their phones. And so when their phones are not in proximity to them, they experience anxiety and withdrawal like symptoms. So this is a real feeling. This is a real experience that people are having. But what you need to really be looking at is, are you just having heavy use? Are you just using it a little bit too much? And can you be cutting that back? Or is there an actual something where you are actually going out of your way to be on social media, even though it's causing problems in your life? So, if there is such, there's actually whole areas of counseling that have been coming up to just deal with social media addiction. And so, there are ways that you can be moving forward with your students, yourself, your families, if required, if somebody is going into the part of social media use where it's not just heavy use, it's actually getting to the point where it's causing problems in their lives. And the interesting thing about social media is that it actually is affecting the same parts of our brain that a lot of things like cocaine, gambling, it's affecting the same places. It stimulates your brain and gives you a shot of dopamine, the happy feelings whenever you're on it. So there can be a really strong connection with people who are maybe feeling a little bit low. They want to get a little bit of a hit from social media. They go to social media. Now, if they get that hit and things are feeling good, they get that dopamine, it's done its job. But if they actually get there and they're not getting that feedback, maybe it's a bit of a lonely place, they're not receiving any responses to their posts, whatever the case may be, people can actually have a bit of a lower, and it can actually make their depression more because they're not connecting. They're actually going for a dopamine hit and it's not being received. So it can actually have a deeper effect on our physiological experience when we're actually on social media. So you want to be thinking about, not only is this just a habit, something that we're working on, it's also something that actually has a physical experience with our bodies when we're using it. And so if you're getting to the point where you need that hit, and you're getting to the point where you think it might be more addiction or heavy use, even being conscious about that is the first step, that there's other things that you can do to make your brain have those feel good dopamines. But the main thing is just understanding that a lot of people are chronically going to social media because they want to just feel better, get that dopamine hit. And then what we can do is start thinking about other things that you need to be putting into your life to help you get that dopamine hit when you're starting to reduce your social media usage. Okay, so what do we do about all this? We know that there are some issues with social media and mental wellness. And so now that we know this, what can we be doing instead? So, the very first thing is the idea of cultivating JOMO instead of FOMO. So, the joy of missing out instead of the fear of missing out. And really taking time to set up a culture and friend groups and experiences that are really about being offline and connecting with people in good old fashioned ways like face to face and spending time together. Not only does that enhance, interpersonal skills and just the overall connections, if you want a true dopamine hit, that's one of the best ways that you can do it. Another thing that we can be doing as educators is we can actually be using technology to help us combat some of the issues of technology. There are a lot of softwares out there that can actually help us monitor how much time we're using. In fact, most people have this on their phone anyway if you're using a smartphone where you can actually see your daily use. But even further than that, there are apps that you can put on that can be monitoring, that can be shutting down social media platforms if you're finding you're having difficulty, within a time period. There are also apps that can help block out any distractions. And the nicest thing, one of the easiest things you can do of all is just turn off your notifications. And I know a lot of people just freaked out when I said that, but in the meantime, notifications are there. They're a tactic used by the social media companies to bring us back to those platforms to, again, consume ads. And so, in the meantime, if we turn those off and we just have dedicated times where we look at our social media, we'll find that instead of the social media owning us, we actually get to own our time. Another thing that we can be doing is having regular conversations with students. Not just one and done, but having it regularly because people need to understand that this is something that's ongoing. It's a part of our everyday lives. And so different experiences and different needs are going to be coming up as their students grow up. And so having conversations as people are going through different experiences online and having regular conversations can be one of the most powerful things that we can do to help prepare our students for the future and cause them and allow them to be more resilient online. Another thing to be thinking about as an educator is understanding that some of our behavior issues that we're seeing may not be attributed to, someone just being a bad kid. Some of the things that we're seeing are maybe more likely that students are not getting enough sleep, that they're perhaps having an online experience that is causing them to have more anxiety and depression, that they may be going through the experiences of cyberbullying. And a lot of our students, there's studies that show, as we mentioned earlier, that eye contact, interpersonal skills, just even the ability to hold a conversation, those types of things are starting to lessen as we have more engagement online. And so, in the meantime, just understanding this as we're getting into perhaps behavior issues with our students is having that more of a wide version of what that student is bringing to that moment can be helpful and can also help you try to identify causes and roots of issues so that you can be going forward in a more positive manner. The one thing that you can be doing as well is going and seeking professional help. There's entire areas of mental health that are being developed right now to help people lessen the effects of online experience and social media addiction. So if you do find that your students, yourself, someone in your family needs a little extra help, there are supports that are available. So let's get into the idea of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is bullying with the use of digital technologies. So it can take place on social media, messaging platforms, gaming platforms, mobile phones. It's repeated behavior aimed at scaring, angering, or shaming those who are targeted. And a lot of people think of cyberbullying almost in the traditional way that we look at bullying from when we were growing up. Some mean person who's, picking on somebody else. In the meantime, what cyberbullying often looks like is actually within friend groups and communications and, the five friends talking on Instagram and through the messaging app. And so when we're talking about cyberbullying, there's different levels of it, but it's important to realize that every one of these things has an effect. And it's different than when you're being, bullied in the past, perhaps there'd be an incident that, you would, maybe affect you personally and you'd be moving forward with it. But with cyberbullying, oftentimes, especially if it's public, this is something that not only is the victim reliving and having to, see the evidence of, but not, that their existing community is also seeing this evidence of bullying, as well as anybody they're going to be meeting in the future. There's a potential of them seeing this bullying as well. So it really amplifies the experience of bullying. So really thinking about cyberbullying, even when it's subtle, when it's between friend groups, up until something that's a bit more overt, that's very out there and in people's faces online. It's very important for us to understand this has a really strong impact on our students and the entire general student community as well. if we are using social media to raise us up and lift us up, we're going to have a far better experience than if we're taking people down. And in the meantime, this is something that is very prevalent, not only amongst students, but it's also prevalent in the adult and professional communities and even amongst businesses. So we want to be thinking about how we're communicating online and what we can be doing to be taking care of each other. There are several things that can happen when you're addressing cyberbullying. So, the very first thing is ideally, you can talk to the person who put something up and they'll take it down. This can be difficult. It requires some interpersonal skills to be able to talk to people. And oftentimes, too, the bully may say no and not do it. So, the second step of what you can be doing, and again, as the teacher, you always want to be seen as an ally. So, giving this experience to the student and saying, listen, just can you talk to them first? If that's not possible, every experience is different. A second thing that can happen is that you can actually report the comment to the social media platform. You can also have several people report the comment. So, if they have a friend group or if there's a group of teachers or parents who also want to be reporting it, then there's probably a better chance that action will be taken and that social media platform will take down that post or perhaps even remove that account from that perpetrator altogether. So that's another way that you can be going through if you need to amplify the cyberbullying to stop it. The third thing that you can be doing is if this is warranted, take it to your vice principal or your principal and actually have them deal with it as a disciplinary action. This is important because we need to be setting the example that this type of experience is not acceptable at all online or in person. And so this is something where your school can actually help support you if this needs to be amplified to that level. And then the fourth level is if required, the school can decide to call in the police. And this can be important around, especially things around the idea of child pornography or if there's any sort of nudity involved. Also, if there's any sort of threat to anybody's well being and their physical selves. There's different levels of cyberbullying. There are things that are very extreme and there are things that are very subtle. And ultimately, what we want to be seen as educators, teachers, and as adults in our students' lives is we want to be seen as an ally and somebody who can help guide them through this difficult thing. Ultimately, this is something that's very common. It happens regularly, but it can make that person feel very alone and can really amplify feelings of depression, anxiety, guilt. And so we want to be helping those students navigate this experience and thinking about it in terms of this is an experience that they can be learning from and taking forward into their lives. And ultimately, too, you want to be bringing parents into the overall experience, whether that's, a child who's not sleeping and they're sleeping at their desk, whether that is they're being cyberbullied, whatever the experience is, they're maybe not even being productive in classrooms because they're too busy on their phone. But ultimately, we want to be engaging with parents as well as we're going through this experience and raising people not only in reality, but in the online space as well. So, one of the first things you can do is we've actually created a webinar for parents as well. So, you can share it with them so that they have a lot of the same information that you have in order to be able to make decisions and understand how the social media space is affecting their child. It's also recommended that you stick to the facts and just say, here's the behavior that I'm experiencing. Try to state of opinions because there is just like anything, there's a wide variety of opinions about how people should be engaging online or engaging with their phones. So if you're sticking to the facts and saying, little Johnny fell asleep in class today, I suspect it might be the phone, that might be a way to proceed rather than kind of putting in opinions. Really sticking to the facts and seeing the behavior issues and sharing that with the parents can be a lot more effective than placing any sort of judgment in terms of the social media use when those conversations happen. And the third thing that you can really be doing is with your students directly, being clear on your social media policy in the classroom, not only once at the beginning of the year, but throughout, and be regular and consistent with what you're expecting from their engagement with you in the classroom learning setting, as well as with their phones, and not just their phones, but specifically social media and in the classroom. So really be thinking about it and making it clear and talking to your students regularly about it over the year can be one of the most powerful tools that you have for keeping order and also educating students about the impacts of social media on their lives and in the classroom. And how do we communicate this information to our students in a way that they're actually going to listen? So, the very first thing we can do is start with the facts. We've got an entire presentation that you can also be sharing directly with your students that have all these research pieces and different reviews that have happened, where students can be learning and making a decision on their own. A second thing you can be doing, especially maybe with teenagers, is encouraging them to learn about this area. Don't let big social media own them and allow them to understand that they don't have to be a slave to this experience that they've grown up with. Basically, they can be looking at this, making their own decisions for their own mental health and well-being in order to actually have a productive life. So really using facts and really kind of challenging them to challenge the status quo and really think about how big social media and big tech affects their life can also have a huge impact in terms of the power that people feel over their lives and going forward. We can also share the pamphlet that we've attached with this learning package with the students. This is a physical printout that you can be creating that gives students an idea of where they can be doing and what kind of things they should be looking at for problematic social media use. And then finally, please feel free to give the students a presentation that we've shared with them. Deliver them these facts and allow them to make decisions for themselves. This is a really important area. We're all in a giant experiment. Let's be sharing all the information we can with our students that's age appropriate to make sure that they understand and can make decisions for themselves for their own healthy well being. Thank you very much. This is an important topic. We all care very much about our students, our own social media use, and the overall future of our society because social media and technology is a part of everything that we're going to be doing for generations to come. So, in the meantime, let's take care of ourselves. Let's be looking at what we need to be doing for our communities and our young people to help them take care of themselves today and into the future.